Welcome back. You're watching The Globe on the SABC News Channel. Stateless people are among the most impacted by the COVID-19 global pandemic and its fallout. That's because thousands of them don't have access to a nationality and the rights connected to having that nationality. A collective of civil society organisations under the banner of the Southern African Nationality Network is now calling on SADC member states to develop a national action plan to address statelessness by 2024. And this includes a plan to identify and resolve stateless situations. For more on this, we're now joined by Legal Counsellor at the Lawyers for Human Rights at Thandeka Chauke. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
All right, let's begin by defining a stateless person, and how does it come about?
Okay, you're very faint, but I think you've asked me to define who a stateless person is. So statelessness is, it sounds like this kind of legal amorphous, or legal quagmire, but it's actually more common than people think. And the legal definition of a stateless person is a person who's not recognized as a national of any country under the operation of its law. So essentially, this is a person who is a national nowhere and a foreigner everywhere. And statelessness can have very severe negative consequences for a person who is affected by it. It can affect every aspect of your life and your ability to participate in the economic, social, and political life of a country that you consider your home and that you live in. If you think of, any interaction that you need to have where you need to produce your ID, be it getting married, getting access to healthcare, seeing a doctor, enrolling for school. This is something that is either impossible or extremely difficult for a person who is stateless and has no documentation. In terms of who it affects, it really can affect anyone. It can affect adults, it can affect children. You can be born stateless or you can become stateless. And for children, the ramifications are even more severe because it can impact your ability to have a healthy adolescent and adult life. In terms of statistics, there are about 12 million to 15 million across the world that are stateless, and 1/3 of these people are actually children.
All right, let's talk about the region that you're operating in. What has caused the statelessness? Typically, how does someone become stateless?
Again, you're very faint, Peter, but I think you've asked me what are the causes of statelessness.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So there are four main causes of statelessness. It can manifest through gaps in nationality laws. So if you think about the means by which people acquire citizenship, in some countries it's by blood. This is jus sanguinis, by descent. In some countries it's by virtue of you being born in that particular territory, which is jus soli. And in other countries, there's also provision for you to acquire citizenship by naturalization, which depends on you living in a particular country for a certain amount of time and then applying for citizenship. So in certain instances, you'll find that there can be a conflict in laws where someone finds themselves in a country that confers citizenship by jus soli, and perhaps you have acquired citizen by jus sanguinis. So those gaps in the law can lead to someone being stateless. There's also displacement. So the movement of people across countries can also lead to, it can be a risk for them losing their nationality. There's also deprivation of nationality, some policies that cause deprivation of nationality. For example, in South Africa, we find the issue of blocked IDs, where someone's ID can be blocked for a variety of reasons, and it can take a very long time to resolve that blocked ID. And in that period of time, the person has no access to the identity documents and or other services that they should be able to acquire through that identity document. Other countries can, have laws that state that if you stay outside of the country for a particular amount of time or years, you can end up losing your citizenship of your country of origin. There's also state cessation, so the dissolution and emergence of new states can also lead to statelessness. In Southern Africa, it's been found that statelessness is driven primarily by the colonial history of Southern Africa. by border changes, migration, poor civil registry systems. So there's a very low rate of birth registration in Africa, and it's considered one of the most prominent causes of statelessness, not only in Southern Africa, but in Africa. So citizenship itself doesn't confer, birth registration itself doesn't confer citizenship, but it does provide that pathway for a person to acquire citizenship. Another prominent driver of statelessness in Southern Africa is discrimination in laws that are based on discrimination in ethnicity, in religion, and in gender. In the world, there are 25 countries that prevent women from passing their nationality to their children. Out of those 25, 8 are in Africa. In South Africa, there's actually a case that Lawyers for Human Rights and the Center for Child Law is bringing before the Constitutional Court, which challenges the provision in the Birth, Death and Registries Act that disallows unmarried fathers from registering the births of their children without the consent of the mother. So there are those elements that also create statelessness.
All right. So how has this been made worse by COVID-19? Or what vulnerabilities arise as a result of COVID-19?
Sorry, please repeat the question.
I said COVID-19, I'm sure, has created some vulnerabilities. Talk to us about those.
Yes, so there are various areas of concern that COVID-19 has now exposed to the situation of stateless people. First and foremost, being their health and well-being. We find that many healthcare systems in Africa are based on nationality, and access for non-nationals is dependent on you being able to produce an identity document or to pay supplementary fees. So for stateless persons that do not have identity documents or that may not have the money to pay to access these services, there's a great risk of them being excluded. There's also the issue of, survival and livelihoods. What we know is that this pandemic has had a devastating effect on many economies, and, hunger is predicted to rise to catastrophic levels. But what we found is that many states are only providing social assistance to their own, to their nationals, to the exclusion of other groups of categories of migrants, which include stateless persons. Yet they also have socioeconomic concerns that need to be taken care of. There's also the prevalence of hate speech and xenophobia, where foreigners and members of minority groups, including those that are stateless, are now increasingly scapegoated and vilified and targeted for hate speech. With the issue of border closures and, movement restrictions, this also affects stateless people that are now refused entry, even if they're seeking protection. And, there's also the insecurity and the increased risk of detention for stateless persons who don't have identity documents. And when they encounter law enforcement, they're at high risks of being arrested and, being held indefinitely in detention and then at risk of deportation. Sometimes where deportation is not an option because no one can determine the state of the person, then they're held, for an indefinite time period. And with that comes, increased exposure to COVID-19 because these facilities tend to be overcrowded. And then there's also new risks of statelessness, which is in the form of civil registration and documentation procedures, which have now been suspended in most countries. And this has affected the ability of states to, register the births of children that are being born during the lockdown period. And that, it increases the risk of those children to become stateless.
All right. Thandeka, this is something I think we need to speak about quite a bit more, but sadly we've run out of time today. We'll leave it there. But thanks so much indeed for highlighting the plight of these people that are stateless and something that authorities really need to take on board and protect. But thanks so much indeed for joining us on the program this evening.
Thank you.